Practical Insights for the First Australian Local File Lodgment Period. I'm Bianca and I'll be your moderator today. Your presenters today from Walters Kluwer are Jim Edwards, CCH Integrator Director and Product Architect, and Daniel Levin, Go-to-Market Leader. In today's webinar, Jim and Daniel will cover some of the practical insights gained from the First Australian Local File Lodgment Period. You can submit questions via the Questions tab at any time throughout the webinar. However, due to time constraints, we will get back to you with answers after the webinar has taken place. I think we're ready to begin, so I'll hand you over to Jim and Daniel.
Thanks very much, Bianca. Jim, so we've just got through this first lodgment period. It's been a mighty effort to get there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been about 12 months now that we've been through the journey of working with the ATO to actually deploy the technology, and then working with a whole bunch of corporations across Australia to work through the process of supporting filing. So it's a good opportunity for us to reflect on that and provide some feedback about what we've learned through that process, and what feedback we've gained from corporates and equally from the ATO, that process. So if everyone here on the line, as you know, Daniel Levin is definitely an expert in this field and very, very close to both the regulatory requirements of the Australian Tax Office, but equally very deeply engaged with helping a lot of corporates throughout the process of meeting their filing obligations. So Daniel will be doing most of the talking today. I'll just be adding to some of his thoughts.
Yeah, I think, Jim, it's been interesting, even with services firms as well. We've got some really insightful feedback and some of the challenges they've also been working through with corporations to try and get these filings in on time. And certainly for today, I think for those that are listening in that are still yet to file their local file, hopefully you'll get some good practical insights for things that you need to think about in relation to your upcoming lodgements. So that'll be probably mainly 31 March, 30 Junes and 30 Septembers, but unless you've got some slightly obscure filing dates. So the agenda today, we're just going to cover some practical learnings and insights that we've gained from the first lodgement. So there's all the early balance at 31 December year ends. So a quick recap on the requirements, take you through what the solution looks like very, very high level, and then some key takeaways and actions. So first up, we've got now around about 1,300 local file lodgements that have come through CCH Integrator for the first filing period, which is fantastic. So we're very pleased by that. Overall, very seamless process. Considering it was the first time the ATO has asked for a disclosure of this nature with binary attachments, makes it a lot more complicated than what they've asked for before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and what's interesting though too is that so many of the Australian multinational corporations that have actually been using the integrated solution as well as part of that process. So we, whilst we don't have exact figures yet from the ATO, we think it's somewhere north of 65% of the Australian economy has actually used integrator to actually support the filing. So that's delivered us some great insight.
Yeah, exactly right. I think, there's still a lot more to be lodged. The number of SGEs, or significant global entities, subject to country-by-country reporting, is probably higher than what the ATO first put out. So they had around about a 2,000 number, but it does look like it's going to be quite a bit more than that. So it will be interesting to see by 30 September what that ends up looking like. Just some tips for those who haven't yet. I think what we've noticed is that there is a need to give yourself enough time to prepare your local file. So this is, while it might appear on the surface to be somewhat of a form-filling exercise, there is a little bit of an iterative process in some respects to this. So you do need to allow some time, and particularly this point around validations. So there are validation rules built into our software, and working through those validations to ensure that what you've inputted into the software is actually validated successfully before you lodge to the tax office. What we don't want to find is and what we've seen is, just really last minute lodgements trying to go through, and, validation rules having to work backwards and forwards to try and get those, signed off and ready to go and to be lodged. We managed to have success, but I would suggest that for those that need to file still, just allowing enough time to do that. Interesting speaking to some of our clients. I think the sheer volume of information, because, while a lot of corporations out there have seen this as being somewhat of an international dealing schedule on steroids, being a more granular version of Section A of your IDS, there is a lot more information you're disclosing now. You're disclosing all these intercompany legal agreements, you're disclosing a copy of the master file, the short form responses, the financial statements, any APAs. So there's a lot more information, and you do need your public officer to review and sign off this information before it goes through to the tax office. So we would really recommend allowing enough time for that process to take place. I think,
And just a question on that, Daniel. So that form of sign-off of corporates being printing out the schedules or sharing the actual completed disclosures with their public officers to get that sign-off, or have they been doing that sign-off before doing the preparation of the disclosure?
I think probably post. I think they've got everything ready in the software first.
Okay.
I think it depends. I think they've probably given them an output of the disclosures.
Yep.
But I think in terms of the legal agreements, the master file, that's probably been given a hard copy for them to review.
Yeah, sure. And I'm assuming that some of the public officers may have just reviewed online as well, being web-based. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a much quicker way, right?
Yeah.
It's collaborative, so that's definitely sped up some of it. But the other thing that's happened too is the master file delay from head office. So there's so many inbounds over here, and particularly 31 December year ends have just filed. A lot of them are inbound multinationals, so headquartered overseas. They've had to wait a long period of time to get their master file from head office. So some have actually submitted their local files and requested extensions without the master file, but some have actually filed later on, right close to the date. So if you can, put lots of pressure in your head office to get that master file sent over to you in enough time. Probably the last point as well, as many of you would have known in the last 12 months, one of the things we wanted to do when we released our solution was really focus on trying to automate and streamline the process that has been bogging down multinationals for so long who've had to complete an IDS. So when we developed the solution, we weren't just focused on trying to produce the prescribed XML schema to the ATO. We were also wanting to help streamline the process as well and see if there could be some process improvements in collecting your numeric data for sort of part A of the local file. So we built that automatic or that robotics tool last year that you might have seen out through some of our events and webinars called Bob the Robot, which is effectively a data transformation tool. And what we're seeing is we're getting a lot of clients getting some real benefit in the time that they're taking to try and group and summarize their intercompany transactional data. But I think, Jim, fair to say that in the first 6 months, everyone's just been really focused on getting this disclosure to the ATO.
Yeah, absolutely. I think many people have seen the value in the technology and the tool, but just haven't had the time year one to really achieve those automation benefits. There were some corporations that were the exception to that.
Yep.
And we've got lots of other corporations that have said, once we've done the year one disclosure, let's automate that transformation process in year two and de-risk it in terms of those manual transformation steps that are in people's heads but not necessarily documented.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, going into year two, there'll be lots of learnings from year one, and I think that it'll be a great opportunity to try and I think people are still waiting for some of the disclosures, even some of the finalised information from the ATO to come out. So it's going to provide a great opportunity to get some clear headspace.
And we do know the ATO is likely to make some amendments as well to the outputs. So I think that sort of people are reluctant to implement process improvement until there's certainty about the output. So
absolutely. Actually, we'll come back to that point a bit later, actually, with what's coming in year two.
Good.
So just quickly, a recap before we show you a quick preview of the solution for those who haven't seen it. These are just some of the filing dates so far. So you can see we've marked off some of the key ones so far. So we're now leading up to our next lodgment for 31 March year end. So some of the UK and Japanese inbounds over here, and then obviously our outbound Australians for 30 June and some of the financial services sector for 30 September. So there's obviously a key eye on those dates coming up now. Very, very quickly, a recap of the requirements for those of you who might not know. I think most would by now, but just for those who might not know, really, in summary, it's a mixture of numeric disclosures, so effectively a supplement to or substitute for Section A of your IDS, so all of your intercompany transactional data, albeit more granular in Part A, and then a whole bunch of attachments that you need to provide to the ATO. So some responses on your local business's operations in the short form local file, which is effectively a list of key questions from the OECD local file, and then supporting intercompany legal agreements for the transactions that you're disclosing at Part A, along with your financial statements, any APAs you may have in place. So that's effectively what you're disclosing is numeric data and attachments. The process for integrator. So, with this having to be transferred or provided to the ATO in XML, unfortunately, you can't just use a standard application like Excel to get to them. You need to use a business management ready tool that, like Integrator, to be able to consume this information and then produce the XML disclosures or XML output to the ATO. So this is just a quick end-to-end summary of how you get data out of your source system, then doing that transformation of that data, which you would otherwise do in potentially Excel or in Bob, our robot, that some clients have done, and then getting it into our disclosures in Integrator before you validate and lodge to the ATO.
Yeah, just a quick point on that too. I think a lot of the source transactions is obviously one of the the hardest parts of the process, getting access to all those underlying records in a format which can then be, transposed into the actual local file disclosures. So, particularly for intercompany transactions, a lot of those have been stored outside of primary ledger systems. So, yes, obviously, if you haven't been through the process yet, that's an area to start focusing on pretty soon in terms of where that's managed and housed.
Absolutely. So just do a quick preview of what the solution looks like. So I think a lot of corporations have been trying to look at what the actual local file disclosures look like, because when you go to the ATO's website, there's no form for you to download like the IDS. So here is essentially what our solution looks like, which is cloud-based, accessed via the web with a unique username and password. Nice simple user interface when you log in. So you've got your navigation panel on your left-hand side as you work through the disclosures, and then on your right-hand side is your main workspace. So for the local file, nice and simple, there's just two schedules you need to look at. There is a loading screen as well if you need to load data in. But for the first part is what we call our general schedule. So this tells you what are you actually filing. Because you can file the local file in parts. So for example, if you wanted to disclose or lodge part A of your local file with your tax return, when it's due, instead of doing section A of your IDS, you can just choose to do section part A first, and then go through the process of completing part A. But obviously, if you want to do all of it in one go, you can then select yes, and this will provide you with all of the conditional questions that will come up underneath. So whether you're filing as a tax agent, an intermediary, or yourself as a multinational, putting in a lot of attributes about your group, ABNs, TFNs, details about whether you're supplying a CBC report separately. These are all the prescribed requirements from the ATO. You have to answer these questions. So we've got that built-in validation rules all around these questions to make sure that you're answering them correctly and not filling out potentially a numeric data where there should be text, for example. So once you've completed that schedule, you'll then go into the heart of the local file, which is essentially this schedule over here. So notice I've got a little pop-up icon about saving it. So it's all live and real-time data. So you need to save your work as you go along. And now we open up the heart of the local file, which is effectively part A and part B. So part A is all about disclosing your transactions, so your different types of intercompany transactions. So these would look quite familiar to you from your IDS, section A of your IDS. So whether it's tangible property of a revenue nature, like question 5 in your IDS, or royalties being question 6. Again, all you're doing now is disclosing that at a more granular level than what you did on your IDS, which is more grouped. There is some new questions you need to answer, like relevant agreement series and around foreign exchange gains and losses. So there is some guidance coming out on foreign exchange gains and losses for year 2. So watch this space on that. And then you move into part B, which is all around the intercompany legal agreements that you're providing in relation to the material transactions that you're disclosing in part A. So it's essentially a list of drop-down boxes that you need to go and disclose. And then we've got a little document browser over here, which is where you will attach your attachments. So you'll attach your legal agreements next to and link them to the particular transactions in part A. And then you'll also attach your short form responses and master file in your general schedule over here. Once you've done with that, it's really a case of just validating what you've done along the way. So you've got a data validation schedule over here where you can go through and actually validate your work. So essentially what this does is it allows you to validate. You can see we've got some validate with errors over here. So what this will do is it'll actually, if I open up the screen, it'll tell me that I've incurred a whole bunch of errors based on the disclosures that I've gone through. And then if I click on that, it'll actually tell me exactly where that error is, particularly in the local file itself. So you'll be able to actually then go and identify what you need to correct before you go back into then revalidating and then lodging to our lodgment portal. So it's essentially that's the process. It's that simple. So before we finish up today, I think what we just wanted to do is just get some key takeaways for you. So I think the first one to call out is there's enough time for everyone to still do this work. We even had clients approaching us 2 days before filing date. Not ideal, but certainly what I would suggest is that you give yourself enough time. But for those who still need to lodge in March and June, there is plenty of time. Just make sure you do allow yourself a little bit of leeway. There is huge penalties for lodging late. So for those who have sort of put this on the back burner, I would strongly prioritise this, getting it in time to avoid those late penalties. We've got an upcoming session with the ATO on the 14th of March in Sydney, which we're going to be broadcasting as a live webinar around the country. That's really exciting. So we're going to be having Anthony Sakoulis and Caroline Barth from the ATO's CBC reporting team talking about their year 1 findings so far with CBC reporting, some trends, some lodgement numbers. I'll be sitting on the panel talking about that with them. which is really exciting, and we'll talk about some of the changes that are coming for year 2. So if you've got any questions from today's sessions, please contact us there as well via that number, and we would be happy to help you and run, if you've got any sort of specific questions around the solution, we can certainly run a demonstration for you as well. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Jim and Daniel, for today's webinar, and thanks to all our attendees for joining us. Have a great day.